The atmosphere in the CNN studio was tense as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the debate stage, her bright red blazer standing out against the blue backdrop. Cameras captured her confident walk as she approached the podium opposite conservative commentator Mark Levin. Moments before, Levin had delivered a fiery 5-minute monologue, labeling Crockett as another radical promoting a dangerous agenda. The audience fell silent as Crockett adjusted her microphone, her gaze fixed firmly on Levin. What followed would make political headlines. Rather than starting her prepared statement, Crockett offered a slight smile and asked Levin a single sharply targeted question. The normally quick-witted commentator froze, his mouth opening and closing without producing a word. "I've been waiting for someone to ask him that for years," whispered an audience member, loud enough for nearby microphones to capture. The moderator, visibly surprised, tried to regain control, but the moment had already passed. For the first time in his decades-long career, Mark Levin was speechless on live television. This wasn't just another debate. It was a turning point. With just 11 carefully chosen words, Jasmine Crockett shifted the conversation entirely. Before we break down this remarkable exchange, make sure to subscribe and like this video so you don't miss our latest political analysis. Now, let's examine how Crockett managed to silence one of conservative media's most influential voices with a question he couldn't answer. Backstage at CNN, Mark Levin paced while reviewing his notes. At 66, the conservative radio host and Fox News personality had built his reputation on aggressive commentary and sharp debate skills. His show, Life, Liberty, and Levin, consistently ranked among Fox's top weekend programs. His books were bestsellers, and his radio audience numbered in the millions. "Ready to put this freshman in her place?" his producer asked, handing him a coffee. Levin smirked. "She's been in Congress, 2 years? I've been doing this since she was in college." He adjusted his tie, confident in his preparation. The topic was federal voting legislation, a subject he had debated for decades, arguing against federal overreach into state election laws. Meanwhile, in a nearby green room, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett reviewed her materials. At 43, the former public defender and civil rights attorney from Dallas had quickly established herself in Congress since 2023. Her experience prosecuting voting rights cases in Texas gave her a depth of knowledge that went beyond talking points. "She's going to come at you hard," her communications director warned. "Levin doesn't play nice." "I'm counting on it," Crockett replied, determination in her eyes. "He's used to people playing defense. Not tonight." She set down her folder and picked up her phone, scrolling to a bookmarked transcript of Levin's show from 3 years earlier. The stakes were high. This CNN debate on election integrity and the balance of federal versus state authority had been promoted for weeks. Conservative media framed it as Levin teaching a newcomer a lesson, while progressive outlets highlighted Crockett's legal expertise, questioning whether Levin's strength was in substance or showmanship. Beneath the political theater, the issues were consequential. Since 2020, Republican-led states had passed numerous new voting laws. Democrats, including Crockett, argued these laws restricted access for minority communities, while Republicans, with Levin vocal in support, defended them as necessary for election integrity. CNN arranged the debate after heated exchanges between Crockett and Levin on social media. What began as Levin criticizing her stance on a federal voting rights bill escalated when Crockett called him all performance, zero substance. Levin challenged her to a debate, likely expecting her to decline, but she accepted immediately. Veteran journalist Anderson Cooper, the program's moderator, gathered both participants for final instructions. "We'll start with opening statements, 5 minutes each. Mr. Levin first, then Representative Crockett. After that, we'll move to direct exchanges. Remember the rules, no interruptions during opening statements, and I'll moderate the discussion portion." Levin nodded confidently, while Crockett smiled politely. On stage, the contrasts were clear. Levin, in his traditional suit and tie, projected authority. Crockett, in her crimson blazer and white blouse, represented a new generation of leadership. The audience, balanced between supporters of both sides, went quiet as cameras went live. Cooper introduced the topic. "Tonight, we address one of the most divisive issues in American politics, Voting rights and election administration. Who should control voting, federal or state governments? And what defines fair access versus election security? He then turned to Levin. Mr. Levin, your opening statement, please. Levin approached the podium, arranging his notes carefully. Thank you, Anderson, he began, looking directly into the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're discussing tonight isn't just policy. It touches the Constitution and the foundation of our republic. As Levin began his familiar points on federalism and state sovereignty, Crockett observed closely, occasionally jotting notes. She didn't appear intimidated by Levin's forceful delivery or the audience's approving nods. Instead, she seemed to be waiting for a specific moment. What viewers didn't know was that Congresswoman Crockett had spent days reviewing every statement Levin had made on voting rights. She wasn't simply preparing to defend her views. She was looking for weaknesses in his arguments, and she had found one. Levin closed his opening statement with a flourish, raising his voice as he warned about radicals trying to federalize elections to secure permanent power. His supporters applauded enthusiastically, while others remained silent. Thank you, Mr. Levin, Cooper said, turning to the Congresswoman. Representative Crockett, your opening statement. Jasmine Crockett approached the podium calmly. Instead of immediately reading prepared remarks, she paused deliberately to take in the room, creating an immediate sense of tension. Before I begin, she said clearly and evenly, I want to thank CNN for hosting this conversation, and Mr. Levin, she nodded toward him, for agreeing to discuss this crucial issue face-to-face rather than from behind a microphone. The subtle jab drew murmurs from the audience. Levin's expression stayed neutral, but he shifted slightly in his chair. Crockett's opening focused on real-world examples rather than abstract principles. She described a 94-year-old black woman from East Texas who had voted in every election since winning the right to vote, only to be turned away in 2018 because her driver's license had expired and new ID rules didn't recognize her long history of voting. This isn't theoretical for me, Crockett said, making eye contact with audience members. I've represented Americans who were denied their constitutional right to vote, not because they were ineligible, but because new rules specifically targeted the ways their communities typically vote. The energy in the studio shifted. While Levin delivered rehearsed talking points, Crockett made the issue tangible through real stories. She methodically addressed Levin's arguments without attacking him personally, maintaining respectful disagreement while dismantling his premises. When she finished, her supporters applauded vigorously, but so did some who had initially leaned toward Levin. The first round had exceeded expectations, setting up a more direct, contentious exchange. Cooper moved to the debate segment. We'll now pose questions to both of you. You'll each have 2 minutes to respond, followed by 1-minute rebuttals. Mr. Levin, you'll start. The first question concerned claims of widespread election fraud. Levin responded with intensity, citing allegations from the 2020 election. Crockett's rebuttal was precise. Mr. Levin, you just cited several claims that over 60 courts, many with Republican-appointed judges, have rejected. Are you suggesting all those judges were wrong, or are you repeating allegations already deemed meritless? Levin's face reddened slightly. The courts didn't examine the evidence. That's incorrect, Crockett interrupted, an unusual break in her composed demeanor. In case after case, the evidence was reviewed and found insufficient. I have the court decisions right here, she said, holding up her tablet with detailed analyses. Would you like me to quote them? The audience reacted to the direct challenge. Momentarily off balance, Levin shifted to broader principles of election security. As the debate continued, a pattern emerged. Levin made sweeping statements with emotional appeals about saving the republic, while Crockett countered with facts, legal precedents, and documented cases. The tension increased as Levin repeatedly defended positions with limited evidence. 45 minutes in, Cooper introduced a new topic. Let's discuss voting methods. Representative Crockett, many states have restricted early voting hours and drop boxes. Critics call these security measures. Supporters say they are unnecessary restrictions. Your thoughts? Crockett nodded. When Texas eliminated 24-hour voting sites and drive-through voting in Harris County after 2020, they cited security. Yet there was not a single case of fraud at these locations. These methods were heavily used by shift workers, healthcare personnel, and working parents, mostly people of color, who faced difficulties voting during standard hours. The restrictions weren't about fraud. They were about limiting voters. Levin, visibly animated, responded, "This is exactly the problem with the radical left. They pretend security risks don't exist. Just because fraud hasn't been caught doesn't mean it won't happen. We must prevent fraud before it occurs." "Oh," Crockett interjected during her rebuttal. "You're limiting voting based on fraud that hasn't happened. How is that different from banning all conservative commentators because they might incite violence, even if they haven't?" The analogy struck a nerve. Levin leaned forward. "That's completely different, and you know it," he said. "Election integrity is as important as the First Amendment," Crockett replied calmly. "But we don't restrict rights based on hypothetical harms. We require evidence." Tension continued through subsequent exchanges. Social media viewers noted Levin increasingly relied on interruptions or dismissals, rather than addressing Crockett's points directly, a shift from his usual precision. Then came a pivotal moment. Discussing mail-in voting restrictions, Levin declared, "No serious constitutional scholar believes the federal government should override state legislatures on election procedures. It violates Article 1, Section 4. As Cooper moved to Crockett for her response, she raised her hand. "Actually, I'd like to ask Mr. Levin a direct question first, if I may." Cooper, sensing a significant moment, nodded. Crockett turned fully to Levin, her expression serious but not confrontational. "Crockett, Mr. Levin, you just made a definitive claim about the Constitution and state powers. Before I respond, I need to clarify something." She paused, ensuring all attention was on her. 3 years ago, on your March 17, 2021 program, you argued strongly that federal courts should have intervened to override Pennsylvania's state Supreme Court when it interpreted state law to allow mail-in ballots received up to 3 days after Election Day to be counted. The studio went silent. Evans's expression shifted from confidence to weariness. You said, and I quote, "When a state court or state official changes election law set by the state legislature, they violate the federal Constitution, and federal courts have not only the right, but the duty to step in." Crockett let the quote linger before continuing. "So my question is simple. If you believe federal courts should override state courts interpreting their own laws, why do you oppose federal legislation protecting voting rights from state restrictions?" She leaned forward slightly. "Aren't you arguing that federal power should override states, but only when it suits your preferred outcome?" The question hung in the air. The audience held its breath. Lebanon opened his mouth, but no words came out for several seconds. "Lebanon, that's completely different." His voice lacked its usual authority. "The Pennsylvania case involved a state court changing rules set by the legislature, which the Constitution explicitly empowers to determine election procedures." Crockett. "So your position is that federal authorities should intervene when state courts interpret state laws in ways you disagree with, but federal legislators shouldn't pass laws protecting voting rights nationwide. I'm trying to understand the principle here." Cooper. "Let's give Mr. Lebanon a chance to clarify his position." Lebanon's face reddened visibly. "Lebanon, the Constitution is clear. State legislatures, not state courts, set election rules. When courts overstep, Crockett, the Supreme Court disagreed with you on that Pennsylvania case. They declined to intervene. But my question remains. You advocated for federal intervention when it would have helped your preferred candidate, but you oppose federal voting rights protections. What is the consistent principle?" The camera caught Lebanon glancing at his notes, searching for a prepared answer. The audience murmured as the silence stretched. "Lebanon, let me be clear. I've been consistent in supporting the Constitution's framework. The radical left wants to federalize elections to cement their power." Crockett, "That's not answering my question. I'm asking about your specific contradiction. You called for federal intervention in Pennsylvania, but oppose federal voting rights legislation. Both involve federal authority over state election practices." The audience leaned forward, captivated. One woman's wide-eyed glance and slight shake of her head captured the moment. Lebanon. You're deliberately misrepresenting my position. The constitutional issues are completely different. Crockett. How so? Please explain the constitutional principle that makes these positions consistent, rather than contradictory. Levin's attempt to cite Article 1. Section 4 became increasingly convoluted as he tried to distinguish federal court. Intervention from congressional legislation. Cooper. I think viewers would benefit from a clear explanation of why these positions don't contradict each other. Levin, under pressure, deflected. Lebanon. Look. The left always plays these gotcha games instead of addressing the real issues facing our country. Crockett didn't respond immediately. Audience members exchanged glances, recognizing the evasion. Cooper. Representative Crockett? Crockett. I don't consider constitutional consistency a gotcha game. It's the foundation of our legal system. My question wasn't rhetorical. I genuinely want to understand how these positions can be reconciled. But it appears there isn't a consistent principle beyond partisan preference. She paused, then continued with calm determination. This isn't about scoring political points. It's about intellectual honesty. We can disagree on policy, but we should at least acknowledge when our positions evolve or contain contradictions. The audience erupted in applause, with even some conservative viewers nodding in grudging respect. Lebanon, usually confident and unshaken, appeared visibly rattled. The debate continued for 20 more minutes, but the dynamic had shifted. Every time Levin tried to regain control with rehearsed talking points, Crockett steered the conversation back to specific facts, court rulings, and documented impacts of voting restrictions. Closing statements. Levin attempted to recover, defending federalism and warning about threats to election integrity. Crockett. Tonight, we've discussed abstract principles, but I want to remind everyone what this is really about. It's about Gladys Harrison, a 94-year-old woman who voted in every election since the Voting Rights Act until she was turned away in 2018. It's about Marcus Wilson, a disabled veteran who couldn't stand, in line for 7 hours at his only polling place after nearby. Locations were closed. Her voice grew passionate but remained controlled. These aren't hypothetical scenarios. They are real Americans being denied their fundamental rights. She turned slightly toward Levin. I respect Mr. Levin's concern for constitutional principles, but the Constitution wasn't designed to empower some Americans while disenfranchising others. It exists to protect all citizens equally. Looking directly at the camera, she concluded. The test of any voting system isn't whether it favors a partisan outcome. It's whether it allows every eligible citizen to cast their ballot without unnecessary obstacles, whether due to community, work schedule, or physical ability. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. Even viewers supporting Levin were moved by the human dimension she brought to an abstract debate. Lebanon's expression reflected frustration mixed with grudging respect. He had entered confident in dominating a freshman congresswoman and left having encountered a formidable opponent. Representative Crockett maintained her composure and highlighted a core inconsistency in Lebanon's position that he could not explain. As the program ended and cameras cut away, social media immediately erupted with clips from the exchange. The question Lebanon failed to answer, pointing out the contradictions in his stance on federal intervention in state election practices, spread across platforms, quickly amassing millions of views. CNN's post-debate analysts were unanimous. Crockett had achieved a rare feat in modern political discourse. Her victory was substantive, rooted not in flashy rhetoric or gotcha moments, but in exposing a genuine logical contradiction at the heart of the debate. What we witnessed, one commentator said, was debate at its finest, focused on substance, not style, and on principles, not talking points. Representative Crockett didn't just win an argument. She showed why these discussions matter. Within an hour, Crockett's question was trending nationwide. Clips of her calmly highlighting Lebanon's contradiction and his struggle to respond had been viewed over 3 million times. Political analysts on CNN acknowledged the significance. Veteran correspondent John King remarked, "I've seen hundreds of political confrontations, And what made this remarkable wasn't just catching a contradiction, it was doing so accurately, in context, and giving him a fair chance to explain. Conservative commentator S. Ekup added, Levin's difficulty wasn't from being ambushed. It was a genuine inability to reconcile two contradictory positions. That's rare from someone whose career is built on projecting certainty. As Crockett left the studio, reporters swarmed her. Did you plan that specific question? One asked. She paused, adjusting her blazer. I came prepared to discuss the substance of voting rights. Mr. Levin's statements are public record. Viewers deserve to know if there's a consistent principle behind his positions or just partisan preference. On Levin's performance, she remained measured. This isn't about personalities. It's about whether constitutional principles are applied consistently or selectively. Levin's exit was notably different. He brushed past journalists with a curt no comment, as his producer led him toward a waiting SUV. By morning, the political landscape had shifted. Major newspapers ran headlines like Crockett corners Levin on constitutional contradiction and freshman representative exposes veterans' double standard. Cable news replayed the exchange repeatedly, analyzing every angle. On conservative talk radio, reactions were mixed. Some hosts defended Levin, claiming Crockett misquoted him, though fact-checkers confirmed her accuracy. Others conceded he had been outmaneuvered on familiar territory. Conservative radio host Rush Mitchell offered a candid perspective. I'm as conservative as they come, but last night was a wake-up call. We can't rely on volume and passion. Crockett came prepared with precision and evidence, exposing real inconsistencies in our arguments about federalism and voting rights. Progressive outlets celebrated, emphasizing the debate's substantive implications over partisan victory. The Atlantic published an analysis titled The Constitutional Contradiction at the Heart of Modern Voting Rights Battles, expanding on the discrepancy Crockett highlighted. By mid-afternoon, legal scholars weighed in. Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe tweeted, Repish Crockett exposed a fundamental contradiction. In current conservative election law theory, you can't argue state supremacy while supporting federal court. Intervention when disagreeing with state court. Interpretations. Conservative. Scholar Jonathan Adler offered a more nuanced take in National Review, while Levin struggled to articulate it. Crockett correctly identified a tension in conservative arguments that deserves serious reflection. The impact went beyond media commentary. Congressional staff reported surges in constituent calls about voting legislation. Several moderate senators reconsidered their positions on the Freedom to Vote Act, prompted by the constitutional issues raised during the debate. 3 days later, Levin addressed the incident on his radio program. Instead of directly answering Crockett, he attacked her background, labeling her a radical lawyer turned politician and dismissing the debate as political theater. When a caller pressed on the constitutional contradiction, he grew frustrated. These are complex issues that can't be reduced to sound bites. The left oversimplifies the distinction between federal court intervention and congressional overreach. The caller persisted, but Levin moved on, evading the question, a fact noted by conservative journalist Jonah Goldberg. When we can't answer straightforward questions about our positions, we have a problem. Levin's inability to respond directly suggests there may not be a coherent principle beyond partisan advantage. Meanwhile, Crockett's national profile soared. Sunday news programs sought interviews, and clips of her methodical questioning were used in law school constitutional classes. Her office received thousands of supportive messages, including from Republicans and independents impressed by her substantive approach. A week later, the debate's broader impact became evident. Senator Liz Warren of Massachusetts, a moderate Republican who had previously opposed federal voting legislation, reversed her position. After reviewing recent public discourse, I've concluded that protecting the right to vote requires federal standards ensuring all eligible Americans can vote without unnecessary barriers. State authority cannot be used to selectively disenfranchise citizens. Analysts linked this shift directly to Crockett's debate moment. CNN's Gloria Borger explained, Crockett exposed the intellectual inconsistency that allowed moderates to oppose voting rights legislation, while claiming to support voting rights. That contradiction is now harder to maintain. 2 weeks later, at a conservative think tank panel on election law, Panelists were asked to justify federal court intervention while opposing congressional voting legislation. After failed attempts, one legal scholar admitted, "We haven't articulated a consistent principle." Representative Crockett identified a genuine tension that must be addressed. Her moment of intellectual honesty earned respect across the spectrum, validating what Crockett had exposed during her exchange with Levin. The story continued influencing American politics. Congressional committees revisited voting rights legislation. Legal journals published special issues on the constitutional questions she raised, and citizen groups organized town halls on voting access. 3 months later, with momentum building for federal voting protections, Crockett reflected in The New Yorker, "I didn't go in looking to create a viral moment or embarrass anyone. I wanted a substantive conversation about a fundamental democratic right. What resonated wasn't political theater. It was simply asking for constitutional consistency. Americans recognized that as reasonable, regardless of political affiliation." The interviewer noted her rare achievement, changing minds through substance rather than spectacle. Crockett smiled. "Constitutional principles aren't partisan, they're American. Applying them consistently protects the rights of all citizens, not just those whose votes we prefer." As voting rights legislation moved toward a Senate vote with bipartisan support, analysts credited the shift to what became known simply as the question. The moment Crockett exposed a contradiction so fundamental that even opponents couldn't ignore it. A routine political confrontation had evolved into a defining moment, prompting Americans to question whether constitutional principles were applied consistently or selectively. And it all began with one question that couldn't be answered. If you found this analysis valuable, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We break down the most important political confrontations and what they mean for America's future. Share your thoughts on Crockett's question and whether Levin could have responded differently. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.